But I was really excited when I was asked to host this session on skills and talent, because I think one thing we can all agree is that Build to Rent is an incredibly people-focused business, really people-focused sector. And no matter how good the operational structure of your business, or even how strong your brand is, unless you have the right people bringing that brand to life, in front of our customers, it's sort of all for naught. So we're very lucky today to have a stellar panel here in front of us, and I'd just like them to introduce themselves. So Matt, please tell us about yourself.
Certainly. My name's Matt Halfpenny. I'm co-founder of Residential Living Recruitment, and I've been recruiting in this particular space now for the best part of 8 years, as well as similar sectors like purpose-built student accommodation, but I've been recruiting for 20 years, which makes me feel bloody old. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. And Darian, please.
So I'm Darian. I'm the General Manager for Coppermaker Square for Greystar in Stratford. So I'm probably just coming out the end of a very long recruitment period with our team there. So we've just recruited around 29/30 positions for our team. And then I guess just kind of looking back over the last 3 years, I've worked on 3 launches, all different sizes in the industry. And so when I was thinking about this yesterday, I think I've recruited over 55 positions in the last 3 years. Everything from facilities, cleaning team, leasing, CSAs, etc., etc. So quite a wealth of knowledge in terms of kind of the recruitment process, whether that's in-house or with recruiters. So nice to meet you all.
Brilliant.
I'll take your 55 and I'll raise it
You will.
to about 130.
Yeah.
Previously, before my current role, I'm Group Operations Director at APO. I was with Grainger. And I was very excited to be able to take them from 9 to 19 sites in a very short period of time. I'm also really ill. I've just got out of bed for you. I'm losing my voice. I'm on steroids and antibiotics, so if I start shaking or frothing, just ignore me over here in the corner. But I started off, I was lucky to grow up overseas in America, Singapore, Australia. And I worked in the hospitality sector in hotels. We have common that we work for TUI Thompson, best holiday rep ever. And then I came over to the dark side and joined property in about 2001. And I worked in the high street agency. And I've been in Build to Rent for about 8 years now, which I absolutely love. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you guys today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. And again, welcome to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. As a growing sector, Build to Rent is having to bring in talent from outside of, outside of the Build to Rent itself, so the wider property sector, but also from other sectors as well. So, Rachel, coming to you first, please give us your views on the benefits of nurturing, developing and promoting the internal talent we have within the sector versus recruiting externally.
When I grew up, I wanted to be a stage manager, a policewoman, an army lady. I never wanted to work in property, okay? And actually, when you go to school and stuff like that, you never kind of get drummed in that you're going to be a resident host or a property manager. I find that loads of people that I work with, they're all accidental, fall into, and that's whether people are coming from retail, hospitality, or actually they might start in, the high street agency, money, or they're looking for a job whilst they go to university, and then they realise actually they like property. So I think us in this room have to deal with a talent pool that is quite different, and it's our job to actually convince them that it's great. And I think for another day and another conversation, we need to look at the grassroots about how we can attract more people into the property industry. But I won't go there today. I think that, answering the question, the internal benefits, being ops director, it's a lot cheaper to promote and replace people within. I mean, if you look at the basic roles, the resident host, the resident services guys, and I'm going to talk mainly today about the property management side of things. You're looking at 6-7K recruitment fees to bring them in. And then on average, if you're looking for a stat, it costs about £1,500 of internal money to train someone up. So, you're already looking at 10K cost. Naturally, we're all dealing in a market that's 1-2% of the current property market, but we're growing. And you've seen Knight Frank stats out today all over the press about how we're just going to boom. So our initial hires will be external, But internally, I think that, you know, the benefits is that we can save some costs, also staff motivation. And that's something I really worked at Grainger. When I joined there was kind of 3 roles. There was the resident host, the resident service manager, and I spent, you know, a good year actually developing lots of different roles and just seeing some familiar faces that I work with. You know, now there's a senior role, there's an assistant role, there's this. So, you know, the benefits of being able to you know, recruit internally and provide different roles is exciting. And then also, I think one of the benefits is that once you've done all that hard work through the induction period and stuff like that, you actually have a group of people that believe in your company culture. And it's always so hard sometimes to bring people in who might have been trained by someone else and start again with embedding that company culture. So I think that's the benefits of internally. Externally, well, the world is the oyster in terms of having a wide talent pool. You know, traditionally, and, you know, oh, we want someone from the hotel background, or we want someone from the student background. I've started tapping up airport staff. I love them. They're always getting shouted at during delays. They know how to deal with problems. You know, they're time bound. So there's quite exciting talent pools that we can actually dip into and look at. And the holiday reps, you know, God, the amount of drunk people I picked up off the floor when I was in Turkey is unbelievable. You've also, you know, when you do go externally, you can fill those skill gaps. You know, we all should be doing a skills gap analysis on the teams and looking at our demographics and stuff like that and making sure that we are recruiting to fill those gaps. I've had one of my regional managers that works for me, he said, oh, let's replicate that person. And I'm like, I don't need to replicate that person 5 times in a site. I want to have that person that will be chatty and smiley and probably not the most productive, but keeps everyone happy. And I want to have other different skill sets as well. So again, externally, you can actually pick, you know, what you want. And then also, again, the fresh perspectives can be brought in as well, I think, with technology and AI and stuff like that. So again, that is kind of where you're at. And my last point on how it affects your brand, I go into Starbucks, they go, hi Rachel, would you like a skinny flat white? I'm mortified, I'm spending too much money with them. But actually in Build to Rent, it's a real positive that if you've got the same faces and the same staff, that, you know, this is really nice. So retaining and keeping that staff, and it does affect your brand, which is part of the retention.
No, some really good stuff there for a growing sector. So the importance of retaining that talent to protect the brand and create that foundation, but then accepting that we are going to have to bring in external talent from outside of the sector, but being really picky. And I heard a phrase, you didn't use it, Rachel, but I heard a phrase from somebody in PBSA, which was looking for that little bit of weird. So characters, personalities that are going to bring something new to the team, to the brand, so you don't have that cookie cutter approach to team building. So no, thank you, Rachel. Matt, coming to yourself, you know, the phrase must have previous BTR experience, so building on the last question, you know, it's probably outlined in about 80-90% of adverts that we see across the sector, you know, but to what extent is that non-property talent getting squeezed out of the market, where we're looking to either poach, dare I say, or hire from other operators or PBSA rather than, you know, looking with a really broad open mind into other sectors?
Yes, I'll share a slide in a second where I've done a few kind of stats around this or some initial analysis, but I suppose to sort of open with, look, there's pressure coming from all different angles. You know, I think dependent on your operating model, so if you're an owner-operator of your own assets, then I think you have probably a bit more control and say over getting that blended approach to building out an operational site-based team. If you're managing a property on behalf of an investor, and maybe an investor that has a particular view on what should or shouldn't be sort of happening in terms of their asset from a people perspective, you can get some very different, you know, different makeup of teams. So we're certainly finding that there seems to have been a push towards getting people that can hit the ground running, as opposed to what I saw sort of 8 years ago. And I would say Build to Rent in its current form in the UK, it's probably only about 10 years old, might be corrected by some people here, but it's roughly about 10 years old. So 8 years ago, illustrate my point with a slide if I can do the clickers. Yes, I can. Brilliant. So this is early stage analysis, okay? So I've kind of done a bit of analysis in my spare time over the evenings at the moment, and if anyone is like my household that's watching Married at First Sight UK, that means I don't have much time to do this type of work. But anyway, so we've got, I had a look at 4 key operators sort of in the market. So actually I don't mind sharing that because it's just a kind of desktop analysis. So we had Get Living, Granger, Bubble and Uncle. So I looked at a sort of fairly wide range. There's some newer brands in there and some more established ones. So, and I looked at some of the core operating roles. So Rachel touched upon it. I just looked at people who've worked at that kind of RSA level, RSM, leasing, so anything kind of within the building, kind of general manager type position. So out of the 139 that I came across within those operators, 27% in total came from a non-property background, okay? So that's 38 people. So when I say non-property, I've included property background as people coming from residential or PBSA. I think they're deemed to be established rental property products now, so that's kind of what's counted there. If you break it down, though, into like the last 12 months, these are people that have been active on LinkedIn, updating their positions in the last 12 months. Only 13% from 46 hires that I sort of located on there have come from these non-property backgrounds. That's 6 from 46. If you then go back further, so you actually look at anyone who has joined a business and is still there, 12 months or more, and this is people that have been there 3, 4 years, 5 years in some instances, it's about 34% from non-property. So that's actually a pretty good number, because if you broke down property into, say, build-to-rent experience, PBSA, actually the non-property background is a pretty fair representation of the building. So I'll give one example. One operator alone, 14% of their hires have come from non-property in the last 12 months, 59% were non-property when you look at people that were hired, 18 months, 2 years ago, and they're still at the organisations now. So not only do people from non-property background stick with this sector and add real value, they're good for retention as well. And I just thought it's not conclusive yet. I'm going to carry this on and try and map the entire market. But I think it's quite a dangerous stat if we're not careful, that if you look at what's still to come in terms of the amount of units, we're 90,000 units, I think, at the moment now. We've got another 140 to come online that's already fully planned or in construction. The scale of how this sector is going to grow is phenomenal. There just won't be the people within the current sector to fulfill those needs. So if the trend is already, we're a little bit dismissive of people who aren't in sector, as it was 8 years ago when no one had a choice, it's quite, people are going to have to get on board with the idea quite soon. They're going to have to train, develop, and onboard new talent. So, yeah, that's me. Brilliant.
Thank you for the detailed answer there, Matt. Much appreciated. And speaking anecdotally, I mean, our business works across both PBSA and BTR at scale, and we still see a lot of clients that we've worked with in PBSA popping up in BTR, and it does seem to be part of that career maturation, really.
Yeah.
So people get to a stage in life where the summer turnarounds, the intensity of that summer turnarounds in PBSA just does not fit with having a young family, all of those sort of things, having to have your holidays and the school holidays. And people almost sort of grow out of PBSA unless they go up to sort of operations director level.
Yeah.
At that kind of site regional level, BTR is a way they can still harness all their skills, all their experience, but actually see a more steady state career and property sector to work in. So we definitely anecdotally still see that. We're talking about sort of people's personal motivations. So the things that motivate people has evolved really significantly in the last 10 to 15 years. So Darian, with that in mind, and particularly in such a competitive market for talent, what is the balance that companies have to find between additional perks, non-contractual benefits, as well as just pure remuneration and salaries?
Yeah, so I think I saw something this week that was referring to 50% of the job ads at the moment on the market are actually hybrid roles now. So that was quite interesting, and I think that's where our sector, unfortunately, we don't have that luxury of being able to kind of offer that to our positions. So I think that's the first thing that we have to kind of already be more creative because a lot of people want that now. That's just the way the world works. So in terms of that, obviously, kind of looking at different roles within kind of, you know, similar operators, if you like, the salaries are generally the same across the board. But I think this is where now the operators really have to try and make themselves stand out from the beginning. I know obviously at Greystar we have quite a generous perks package. We are very lucky in that sense, but it really does make a difference. And I think no matter which role you're coming from or going into, these perks do get used. They are kind of massive incentives for people, and even more so for the people at the, you know, lower level roles, if you like, maybe on the kind of lower salary brackets. These perks will really, really enhance their time in the company and probably impact how long they stay with the business. So to give an idea of that, particularly with obviously the Greystar, I know we've got a lot of the team in the room, so they'll vouch for this, but we have an exhaustive list. So that's, you know, as a female, you'll look into things around maternity packages, for example, and you'll compare that. Or the smaller things like your birthdays and having that off, or do you do parties, do you not do parties, do you do awards, do you not do awards, pension schemes, you know, all of these little things. At Greystar, we actually have a wellness membership, so it's nice to see, obviously, the business really does actually care about your well-being. So yeah, I think it's really now a case of thinking about, especially if you're trying to get talent from non-property background, they could have 4 offers in front of them, 3 of which might be hybrid working, which is obviously hugely attractive. So how can we stand out and what can we offer if the salary is all the same? So, yeah.
No, brilliant. Well, look, coming from a service company where our sector non-contractual benefits are usually, you know, at the lower end, I'm really pleased that so many of my team are in the room to listen to you say that. So much appreciated. But focusing on salaries, obviously, even at property manager level, we're seeing a lot of variety in, well, that's a polite way of putting it, a big difference between the top and the bottom of the salary brackets. So Rachel, do you have any thoughts on what's driving that?
It's really interesting. In regards to, I think we have so many different job descriptions out for roles that have got very similar titles. You know, I've had people who have come and worked for, you know, my operational teams and like, you're asking me to do what? You know, they're expecting to sit, hand out parcels and smile, where I want them to go and do inventory check-ins and, you know, all these different things and stuff like that. So I think that, you know, there is, again, as an industry, a piece of work to do around job titles, expectations and salaries. And I think what is interesting for me, having come from the private rental sector when I was with Hamptons International, the salaries are higher in high street agency for property managers and for leasing than they are actually in build to rent, because we have these pressures of these gross to nets and operating costs and NOI. So I think that that's why I'm seeing some of my staff leaving build to rent, because they're, like you said, getting this hybrid working, less antisocial hours and better salaries. So, you know, us taking from the hotel industry on traditionally low salaries and very hard workers and stuff like that, you know, I think there is a huge change that has to happen of us educating either the asset managers, the owners, or the investors to change these salaries. And we've all seen, haven't we, a massive rise in salaries over the last year or two. So you can give them some financial, you know, is great, having a wellness membership and stuff like that, because so many of them are opting out of the pension because they can't afford to have that deduction from their salary, which is sad. And having lived in Australia where superannuation is automatically taken out and you can't opt out, I think it's a shame in the UK we don't have something like that.
No, absolutely. Coming back to you, Darian, you know, a lot of the recruitment activity in building new teams obviously happens around mobilisation periods, but what are the different outcomes that you experience when you've had very little time to, very little notice to enter that mobilisation period, build the team, set up the building operation, versus when you have a much longer timescale to be aware, plan and engage?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that can be said about mobilisation as a whole in terms of timeframes, but I think particularly with staffing, I would 100% say there's a direct link between if it's planned well and there's enough time to do it properly, the performance of the asset will undoubtedly show you that in the results. So that's probably the main point. I think probably 4 main things. So if it's a really fast mobilisation, and I'm talking, sometimes I've seen 3 months, for example, you have to think about everybody involved in that process. So internally, HR teams, their capacity, IT teams in terms of setting up, getting ready for these new people to make sure they have a good experience. All of that becomes crunched into such a short time frame. And then it begs the question around the quality of that. So has the interview process been thorough? Have you found the right people, or are you actually just kind of working more on a desperation perspective to fill the roles and get obviously the site operational? And then obviously from the actual candidate's perspective, do they get training, or are they just kind of expected to learn on the job? Are they put in front of residents when they haven't really been told what's expected of them? Do they have a good onboarding process? Probably not. And I think that's where, especially now, if you're looking for people to move from one business to another in the industry, the expectations from candidates are a lot higher now. So they expect, as a standard, really good onboarding, really good training, really good systems training. And I think that's quite a fair thing to expect in terms of, wanting them to feel confident and putting them in the right position to be successful in their role. So I think it's detrimental. But then I think obviously on the flip side of that, if you do a really well-planned mobilisation, yes, obviously, you're paying for that staff cost early on in the process. But for example, I've worked for kind of 2 operators now, and on both occasions, it's basically the preference to have 12 months lead-up time to mobilisation as a minimum. And I think what that means then is obviously you can really make sure that the interview process is quality for the actual people carrying that out, so recruiters, HR teams, individuals, and it's not rushed, and you can really make a good decision of who you want to bring in. You can recruit your leaders of the team first so that they can then have that kind of control element of who they want to bring into the teams, and I think that's quite important. And yeah, I think, in terms of that, then you can actually have kind of, really well planned out training and onboarding processes right the way through. And I guess some of the softer elements, which are really important as well to the success of the team, like your team actually have time to, bond together. As cheesy as that sound, it is actually really important because they build trust with each other. They understand kind of the different departments that they'll be working within and kind of who does what within those teams. And it's not just, again, learning on the job. So it is really, really important. And I think, if you do the onboarding piece properly, I'm sure anyone who works in the HR teams as well will probably vouch for this. If you do it really, really well, you will retain people, and they're not going to be turning around in a month's time and saying, look, this wasn't the role that I was sold, because they will see that you've taken the time to do something specifically for them and obviously for their role. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said in terms of making sure the time's planned out with staffing in mind, definitely.
No, absolutely. And Matt, just briefly, anything you'd want to add from a recruiter's perspective on the quality of outcomes?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're given more time, it's always better. I think if you look at any recruitment process, whether it's a short period of time or it's a long period of time, you can experience bumps in the road. We're dealing with people. It's not a bit of software or a bit of kit. They're going to change their mind. There's going to be moving parts in any process. I don't care whether you're new to recruiting in this market or if you've got a lot of experience. So obviously, if you've got more time to do a recruitment process, you will genuinely get better results. I think if you're going to be in a tight time frame, either you've tried yourself and you haven't sort of had any luck with it, or the handover of a building is happened quite late in the day and you've got this kind of scrabbling around, then I think you just got to be really transparent with any external partner you're using. Explain the situation, explain what day one's going to look like. Don't try and go, everything's going to be perfect, we've still got great onboarding, if that's not the case, because actually most people, we can manage expectations. You can get a different type of personality into that building that's a little bit more it's like resilient to it, as opposed to just treating every job like it's going to be perfect when they get in there. That's one thing I've, being in this market for a long time, the operators that are really straight down the line with like what's good about their organisation and what still needs to be improved, tend to fare better than ones that try and just maybe say, yeah, we've kind of got everything covered or we've got nothing covered. You've just got to be honest with people, really.
No, thank you. Taking the sort of recruitment conversation down a level as well, I think we can all agree that on sites, the people that actually have a lot of the day-to-day contact with residents are quite often in the service elements of the building. So whether it's the cleaning team, the maintenance team, or even sort of the night security, night concierge, and a big way of driving talent is directly related to the hourly rate of pay. And we've done a lot of work with the UK around promoting the real living wage across the sector. Now, Rachel, I know your business has been at the very forefront of pushing the real living wage. So I just think it'd be useful for the audience here to understand what motivated Apo to take the step to going sort of 100% real living wage and London living wage across the portfolio. And that's including with third-party suppliers.
Yeah, I've always been lucky to work with employers that have really stressed to me that they want London living wage. They want staff that are third-party to feel a part of the business and to feel, cared for. And they're, third parties are always invited to Christmas parties and stuff like that. For me, this is new. 9 months into not being an owner-operator, I'm now client-side, which is really odd because I have to ask people's permission rather than just going and doing it. But we have, our investor, the owner of 2 of our schemes, is an American pension fund. I've learned so much from them because they really drive with their ESG and their policies that, contractors, we have to get contractors to fill out, where their source of staff are coming from, what their salaries are, and, and they are audited. And actually for us as a managing agent now to be able to display that we're used to dealing with that and that when we go out on our procurement exercises, we are looking for people who can provide us with evidence of ethical and moral way of dealing with their subcontractors and teams is massive. And I'm really proud. I'm absolutely proud that we can say that all of the staff that work on our sites, third party, are well looked after.
No, thank you. It's really interesting because it is an area where actually other property sectors are ahead of build to rent. But actually it's so in line with the values of the build-to-rent sector that I see it's a real area of opportunity. And again, you see the impact that it has on resident engagement. So again, these are the people who are quite often, particularly in the evenings and weekends, that residents are bumping into and having engagement with. And that motivation, that joy in work really comes across and does help build communities. So no, thank you for that insight, Rachel. Appreciate it. Matt, just coming back to you, sort of Joe Green did a great session, I'm sure many of you were in it earlier, on the levels of qualifications within operators. But outside of the IRPM and other technical training, are investors, operators looking to enrol sort of future leaders from what you're seeing into non or less industry-specific qualifications? I'm thinking sort of leadership, management skills, etc. And what sort of impact do you think this can have, or positive impact can this have on talent retention within businesses as well as within the sector?
So I think it's undoubtedly it is happening out there, probably in pockets. I don't think if it is happening, I don't necessarily think the operators shout enough about it or include it enough in job descriptions, adverts, whatever that may be. I mean, a lot of the time I find like an advert kind of reads like 90% of what we want from you, and there's like this little 10% of what you might get back from us. And I think we could work better at readjusting that and really kind of like spell out the sort of things that they're looking to put people on. I think the big one for me, if there was something that could be adopted universally, is putting more of these managers that are getting, in a good way, businesses are scaling quickly, so opportunities are coming up, and people, which I'm really pleased to see, we've played our part in placing people at, say, resident service manager going to, almost like multi-site or regional manager within the space of 3 or 4 years, fantastic. Providing, though, that they're still getting that ongoing kind of coaching, developing, management training, support, because it's, we're in an ever-changing environment and generation of people coming in, and it requires different skills as this sort of sector evolves. So I think it's crucial. If there was one thing, it's definitely around like people management, having difficult conversations with people, how to conduct those, performance management, all of that kind of stuff, because I think we've got a young generation of managers coming through that are doing it possibly for the first time ever. And if they get overwhelmed, you end up losing really good talent, not because they don't want to be here, but because maybe they've been burnt out, fatigued, lack of training, lack of support. That would be my biggest kind of concern, I guess.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you. We're coming towards the end of the session, so as we're under orders from Brendan for calls to action, come to yourself, Rachel. What would you give the audience here as a call to action relating to skills and talent?
So, if you're responsible for recruiting, I think my call to action is when you are looking at that team, whether it's a new site coming on or it's your own team, that you don't replicate the same individual, that you look for different aces in their places. And so you have the extrovert, you have the introvert, you have the detail-led person, because the same person in a site is not going to work. So I'm going to ask you all to really look at your teams and really make sure you've got the right skills.
Perfect, thank you. And Darian, from yourself.
So I think mine's back to the mobilisation, because I feel very strongly about this. I think I would say, if you have a portfolio and you're obviously growing that portfolio, I would pay attention to kind of how much time you plan the mobilisation, and also don't rely on your existing teams to support during that time, because it has a detrimental effect. They get burnt out, they're worn really thin. You might get your strongest people involved in a brand new mobilisation because you're, time sensitive and you're against the clock. But then your existing sites will suffer because the person who's leading that or trying to juggle those things is literally trying to do everything to the best of their ability. So I think definitely invest in that time for the mobilisation of any new onboarding, because it will absolutely pay off for the team and for the performance, essentially.
Brilliant, thank you. And then finally, Matt.
I would say I would like us to get back or closer back to where we were sort of 8 years ago, looking beyond the CV or the name of their operator they're currently working for, and just be a little bit more kind of open-minded, because as I say, there isn't enough talent in the sector currently to support where it's going. So sooner or later, there's going to have to be a bit of a shift back to kind of diversifying the people that we bring in. But by the way, people in property that want to stay in property should 100% get opportunities. So I'm not saying that, but we need to address this kind of almost like 90 to 10% ratio and get it closer to a nice blend, similar to what Rachel was saying.
Well,
really.
it's a growing sector. We can have our cake and eat it.
Yeah.
But and from me as well, just to add one, listening to you guys, so building off what Rachel and Matt said there. Sorry, Darian, it's not about mobilisation.
It's okay.
It's something that I've really learned in this sector is to treat that diversity of background, culture, experience as a competitive advantage. Because as a business leader, if I'm the smartest person in the room, it means I've failed to recruit a really high quality team. And actually, when you can build a really talented pool of people with genuine diversity, you come out with much stronger ideas and business strategies. And there's a really practical tool that came out of one of the sessions last year that we did implement in our business. It's been incredibly successful. And it feels like it should be unnecessary, but it's had a really positive impact, is that at every level of our business, we now take the names off all CVs. So whenever they come in, whether it's for administrative positions, frontline positions, senior management positions, that first CV screen is completely anonymous.
Like that.
And that has led to much stronger shortlists and much better recruitment outcomes, and we built a stronger team that we feel is taking the business forward in the direction we want to. So that was a great tip that came from one of the panel sessions last year that I felt strongly enough about that it's worth sharing. But look, thank you very much for attending the session. I think we're very lucky to have a really broad view from some incredibly experienced and skillful and talented individuals from the sector. So if you join me in putting our hands together and thank the panel. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference this afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Come out this way, if Sam's still there, I'll just give you.
Yeah, I think so, maybe. It's quite embarrassing. We're going to go to the AI one.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, good. Microphone is on. My name is Andy Cameron Smith. I'm Content and Editorial Director at Unlock Net Zero, and I'm going to be your chair for this session. So welcome along. This session is entitled Improving Sustainability of Build to Rent Assets. So what we're going to try and do over the next 35 minutes, you are going to hear from a number of experts in this field, and then we're going to explore some key themes and questions. That's going to be based around why should Build to Rent invest in net zero? What are the challenges and reality for Build to Rent development and asset management when delivering sustainable impact? And we're also going to look at, is Build to Rent design and use really delivering on the current journey to net zero? But I think just before we start, we should set a little bit of context. So I think we should all be aware that net zero is actually a systems challenge and will therefore need a systems solution. What we're talking about with net zero is the decarbonisation of our whole energy system and our whole economy. That means that the built environment and housing are a component part of this ecosystem. And within that, Build to Rent is a component part of that sub-ecosystem as well. So when we talk about net zero, everything in the journey is interconnected. And we need to understand that when we're looking at the potential solutions we can come up with. So I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon to discuss these themes by Richard Langshire, who's Programme Director at the Future Homes Hub, Ella Revitt, who is Sustainable Business Executive at Planet Mark, and Chris Holmes, who's Managing Director at Hermetica Black. So the format for this afternoon is the panel will share some opening remarks and thoughts around this topic, and then we'll move into a wider discussion. So we have some questions that we'll be asking but we'd also like you to get involved as well this afternoon. I always think these kind of sessions work better when they turn into a debate and a discussion rather than just a broadcast of views from the stage. So please, when I ask for questions, don't be shy. That'll be great. So that's enough from me. I'm now going to ask Richard if you could formally open the session for us and just share some thoughts.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Andy, and good afternoon, everyone. So my, I suppose, take on it, where I'm coming from, is from the Future Homes Standard, Future Homes Hub, looking primarily at new build construction, so new build homes, of which I think, and you might have heard some stats earlier today, I think apartments are about 24% of the new build homes in this country at the moment. So apartments is a very fundamental part of what we're talking about. But for the new home sector, there's fundamental and significant change coming down the line, moving towards our sort of the climate goals of 2050 to get to net zero. But it's more than that. It's about nature recovery as well. So we know we've got the Future Home Standard coming up. So the Future Home Standard consultation, which should have been published in October, still not published yet. So we're still waiting for government to do that. But that's essentially moving us by 2025 to be net zero carbon in operation. I say net zero because, zero carbon ready. I say zero carbon ready because obviously we're waiting for the grid to decarbonise as well. So that's about sort of zero carbon operation, but shortly after that, we know that government consulting next year on whole life carbon as well. So this is about the whole life carbon emissions. Really, so we need to understand the embodied carbon of the materials we're using to build, and obviously the impact on that on the whole life carbon of structures. But if we just focus on net zero, we miss out on some really fundamental parts around nature as well. So we've got biodiversity net gain, which is being introduced, mandatory biodiversity net gain from January, which means that all developments must have an increase in biodiversity of more than 10% or minimum 10% from January. But then we've got to consider the wider nature effects as well. So looking at water, the effects on water, driving water efficiency, coming up with water neutrality, nature neutrality really in the places that we build, and then other elements in the environment, looking at air quality and waste and resourcing. So these are fundamental changes that the home building industry has to address, and we've got to be considering how to do that now, I suppose, and that was opening remarks. How are we going to sort of frame what we ought to be thinking about? It's about how we need to address and understand the changes that we're going to be delivering in the new home sector.
Thanks, Richard. So I think that's interesting that we have to start looking at everything in the round as well here, that it's not the possibility just to look at things in kind of silos and stuff.
Absolutely.
Like that
Yeah.
as well. Great. Ella, if I could ask you.
Hi, is this working? Yeah. I'm Ella. I work for Planet Mark. We are a sustainability certification for businesses and for buildings. And so my real focus is on driving decarbonisation specifically across the built environment sector more generally, and how to address those challenges around net zero and other areas of ESG and sustainability and whatnot. And to start with, just looking at what does net zero look like for businesses, because there's various different definitions around. So just to kind of make sure we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. It's essentially, in simplest terms, for a business across any industry to achieve net zero, they need to be looking at a minimum 90% reduction against their baseline year or their starting point across all of their direct and indirect emissions. And in the build-to-rent sector, that a huge part of those indirect emissions for developers, property managers, even construction companies involved in the build is going to be relating to the emissions associated with their assets and with their buildings. And so when it comes to net zero, there's kind of some key areas in this sector more particular that by focusing on them, we can really kind of unlock the opportunities that are associated with this business and kind of countrywide transition. And within our certifications, we centre on kind of three key pillars of measurement, engagement and communication. And I think that's quite a useful lens to look through these different areas of challenges and opportunities. From a measurement side of things, you already touched on the importance of looking at embodied carbon and operational carbon, the whole picture of what a building is emitting and its environmental and social impacts. And that's really crucial, not only in terms of capturing that, understanding that data, measuring that impact, but also using it to actually drive our decisions and act upon it and identify lower carbon solutions that is actually going to make a change. From an engagement point of view, it's not going to be done in isolation. This is going to require the entire value and supply chain to come on that journey with you, and so it's going to be really crucial that you're working across that process, those processes, across those systems to collaborate and identify those solutions together. And then from a communication point of view, it's a little bit about creating that consistency in reporting and making sure that you're really being clear and transparent about what you're doing and your actions and your ambitions. But it's also about speaking and directly interacting with that end user. And for the build to rent, a lot of the time, tenants can be a really valuable asset to be engaging with, to be communicating with, to bring them on that journey so that they are getting the best out of the building, but also doing their bit for the planet as well. So I think by tackling those three areas of data, knowledge and collaboration and communication, you can really start to begin that net zero transition across the sector.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think some key thing. I think it's great to start with clear definitions of what we're talking about. So I think there's any number of definitions just about net zero, and it's a term which is thrown around quite readily these days. So I think we all need to know that kind of base. And I think you also touched upon there maybe some of the volume of work that is ahead of us kind of thing, which we need to get our head around there as well. I'm sure we'll pick all of that up in the Q&A session as well. But Chris, your thoughts, please.
Hi, Chris Holmes. Hamatica Black, we're a development manager and asset manager of decentralised energy systems on the journey to net zero. So we tend to work with infrastructure funds, central government, local authorities, and large users of energy and real estate being part of that final category. So we try and work to develop good infrastructure, good projects from the design and feasibility stage, but take them all the way through actual delivery to handover and then into operation. So making sure that they're monitored appropriately and they're achieving the outcomes of what was set out in the design and the strategic phase. I'll be careful about what I say because there's a few people we work with in the room who might disagree with some of the things. But a lot of what we try and do is sorting out the energy supply that's in the deregulated market, the sector that actually people forget about a lot. The grid is decarbonising naturally. So arguably, if you are electrified as a building, you will naturally get to a point where you could feasibly be net zero, depending on what the government does on the generation side of the system. So looking at heat is a really key part of our business at the moment. It's unregulated. People don't really understand, firstly, the commercial principles behind it, how it gets and how you lose heat across large systems, the pricing mechanisms, and then the impact it can have on end users. So I think hopefully our projects, what we try and do is align with ESG principles. And ESG for us means not just the governance from a financial perspective, because these projects should be sustainable financially and commercially as well. They should be able to almost be reused, repurposed at the end of their useful life of assets and so on and so forth, which is why heat networks, I think, is so important in driving the change of carbon factors in heat specifically, because arguably you have 60-year infrastructure and it doesn't matter what you connect to generate that heat. You can still connect buildings, which sort of helps you future-proof. But at the same time, sustainability from a carbon perspective does mean finding the right generation assets and then actually operating the systems appropriately. And I think that's something that's really forgotten across all the sectors that we work in, which are numerous and not just build to rent. People don't really get how design and delivery changes the use of systems. So when you've designed a good system, if you're not operating it appropriately, it can have massive impacts on what you can do, and then, as per Ella's point, what you can say, because greenwashing is a massive problem in the industry, and we're really starting to see people get called out for it. I think there's people, activist investors, suing funds in Europe at the moment for not meeting ESG targets. There was a large, raid on an office of a fund manager in Frankfurt within the last year, about what they were doing, what they were selling, which functionally results in fraud. And actually, when you are delivering these things, you really need to start thinking about not throwing these words away, because carbon should be as important as the roof over your head in relation to the policy shift that seems to be happening at the moment. So we think that actually one of the things that these systems need to demonstrate is good management and good operation, and actually thinking about that in the build-to-rent sector becomes slightly easier because you have a clearly defined outcome, you have a clearly defined community, and actually once you've started to build that community, you can start to feed back into the development process and make sure that those learnings in operation are also reflected in design. And actually I think that's what the opportunity is for the build-to-rent sector. It's to move away from policy, which is going up and down, and actually start to define your own outcomes as a sector to say we are leading the basis of this because we know the impact this has on our communities, whether that be social, whether that be environmental and ecological, which is important, or whether that be cost. And let's be honest, the last year has demonstrated what an impact cost can have on the communities that we all operate within.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I think two key themes I picked up there from the points you made there, that financial challenge of proving the operational worth, and then this question as well about the driving of standards. As we say, you know, we're operating against a not consistent policy framework, shall I say, capture my words carefully kind of thing, but there is the opportunity for sectors and industries to define standards and move towards and take that kind of sector with them. So thank you very much to the panel. You've heard a wide range of views and thoughts around this kind of topic there. So we're going to spend the next 15 minutes or so of what we've got picking at kind of little themes of them. So I'm going to come out and ask for some questions in a minute, but I'm just going to start and throw one chair's prerogative to the panel. You hear net zero talked about 2050 is the end goal. We've got targets in 2030, 2035. What should operators and landlords be looking at now to start to really make that difference? I suppose part of that question is, why is it important to them now to start this journey or continue the journey? Who would like to go first?
I have a quick stab at that, only because I'm in danger of repeating what Chris said. Chris, you're really eloquent. Well, thanks for that last bit, but especially the points you're making about institutional investors. You know, why do it now? Because we're being demanded to do that. We've got to start reporting and reporting effectively about the journey we're on, moving to net zero. But I think there's possibly two other key points. One is about the consumer, the actual resident themselves. If we're doing this well, then it's going to have a direct impact on the quality of life for people living there, and potentially the money in their pocket as well. Because homes that are airtight, that are thermally efficient, that have high quality heating inside them, are essentially built to a good standard, decent quality as well. So that's the selling point really. And then coupled with organisations that are genuinely offering net zero or zero bills, that's a fantastic selling point in its own right. And you can start to offer that with high quality thermally insulated apartments. So that's on the customer. And then the other one, as I said in my piece, just about what's coming down the line. We know there's significant legislation coming down the line. So those who are building will continue to build new developments. And even those that just refurbishing, just have to get the supply chain and the skills in place. We're all going to be fighting over the same set of skills that are going to be trying to install these new technologies. We're going to be speaking to the same suppliers supplying these technologies as well. By acting early, we can start to future-proof businesses themselves.
Ella, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that final point is really important around. We know the climate science is giving us that deadline. It's in order to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, we need to achieve dramatic decarbonisation before 2050 or earlier. And so we know that that's almost the end point, the end goal that we're working towards. And it's the classic case of the sooner you start and the sooner you get to grips with where you're starting from, the easier, the smoother, the more cost-effective that transition can be. And so when you start to get to grips with what your business and your asset operations and emissions are looking like, then it's going to be more, you're going to be able to take it in bite-sized chunks. It's not going to be as dramatic a shift as if it was 2049 and you hadn't started thinking about this yet. So I think from our point of view at the moment, it's what you mentioned around. It's an opportunity to really tackle this head on and get ahead of the game, and understand what our baseline is, so that we can then start to make those changes in line with legislation as that comes further down the pipeline. But it's really crucial to get started now to future-proof your business, your property portfolio and whatnot further down the line, I think.
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, it's absolutely right. I think that the build-to-rent sector seems to be quite good. And again, this is where the opportunity, it's why we enjoy working in this sector, because it's kind of repeat and you can kind of learn from your mistakes. And actually someone was talking earlier about how it doesn't matter whether you get involved early or you buy from house builders. You still need that function of a build-to-rent market, which I don't disagree with. But actually, the opportunity is to make sure you're not just buying the same stuff and retrofitting from house builders. The opportunity is to sit there and say, well, no, we know what our community wants. We know what the emissions look like. We know what the data is, and we know where we should focus our efforts to make sure that, first off, we're doing right now. We're optimizing the systems that we use, and then we can look to develop new technologies. And new technologies should be ubiquitous across all of the portfolios we're talking about. They should be able to be attached to anything. If it's not a heat pump, it could be, and I say this very guardedly, it could be micronuclear. Who's to say that in 20 years' time we don't have hydrolysis in the bottom of plant rooms instead of boilers? Those things should be an opportunity for the build-to-rent sector, who will look at this on an annual basis. You budget 18 months ahead of the year that comes down the line. So you should be thinking about what's coming down 18 months down the line. And I think one of the things that we were talking about earlier is a starting point that's missed by contractors, specs that tend to get reused, honestly, between design consultants and contracts, is proper metering of systems and proper metering of data. And I'm only focusing on energy here, and I don't mean to, but that is critical in making sure that the business, the industry standards that you're applying, such as the GRESB monitoring system and the scoring system, if you don't have that correct data, you won't know where you are. You won't know where to start from. You won't be able to be scored on that industry standard, and you won't be able to improve the situation that you have in those assets. So actually, some of the things that we should be thinking about is making sure we get the data right, make sure we know where we are, and then you can start looking at AI. You can look at digital twins of systems to optimize heat networks along with cooling loads. You can start looking at waste heat from industrial processes. You can look at dockside cooling. You can look at all of the other stuff that we see as sort of wasted heat in the market at the moment. But until you know where you are, until you know what that opportunity looks like, it's quite hard to define how you deliver it.
You need to understand the problem first before you create the solution, really, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the big things, because there's so many interesting, look at the data center market, for example. They are looking at PUE as an absolute industry standard, which is their power usage effectiveness. EPCs don't really work, I think, from my perspective. I don't see that as something that people look at and say, well, if we've got EPCA, that solved our problem, we're done. What we should be doing is sitting there saying, why isn't this building looking at its density of power? Every kilowatt hour per meter squared should be looked at, should be reviewed, should be scored against, and then you have a competitive market that can be driven.
Yeah, it's always difficult, isn't it, when you need a mass kind of standard kind of thing. And like you say, I think imperfect is the best way to kind of describe EPC at the minute. Okay, I'm going to come out to the audience now. I'm keen to know if there are any burning questions. No pun intended there, as we're talking about climate change. But does anybody have a question? Yeah, I think we've got a mic. If you just introduce yourself, please, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm James Pargeter from GAA. When this sort of purpose-built rental sector started, there was quite a few operators who were saying, offering bills included type of accommodation. That, to me, seems completely unsustainable, to use a word. I think it's probably dying out, but for how can that be justified in the current day, let alone into the future? But are you seeing retrofitting work in terms of installing meters, perhaps when there weren't any? And I'm thinking maybe it's probably more of an issue in student and co-living than self-contained build-to-rent, I suspect. But of course, it creates an administrative headache. But that's one that we need to tackle, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the there's actually regulation now which is backward-looking as well. So you're forced to install meters because demand-side measures are so important. If people think that they aren't being charged or don't realise what they're using, they won't use it properly. And I think you're right. People will shift away from the all-inclusive model, and they should do for that reason, because people should be responsible, not as a group but as an individual. If you've got the right systems in a build-to-rent development, then you can help drive change through behaviours. I think another really obvious reason for not doing that is, I reckon, the bottom line of most PBSA developers took a massive hit in the last year because they're offering inclusive rents and they can't suddenly up their rents during a time when I think there was a 10 to 25 times increase in the price of utilities. So yeah, it's a huge issue, and I think people should be responsible for what they use. And actually, I think the communities are driving that as well. They're sitting there saying they want to be, they want to know more, and I think that'll really help.
I agree. I think that also highlights if they've got the responsibility, they need to be. There's an element of we need to help educate, upskill, engage the tenants and the end users around how to use the building in its most effective way. If they're installing all of these smart technologies, AI, it's all well and good, but if they're not using it correctly, then it's not going to have the desired effect. So that, but also the justification and why it's important to be living in an energy efficient building and using it appropriately, and protecting the wider environment and biodiversity of the site and things like that as well. It's all about bringing them on that journey and helping them to understand the impact that they can have and the behavioural change that they can implement that's going to ultimately maximise the effect of the kind of whole community, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's a massive point. Almost the biggest part of the net zero transition is behaviour change. Mm-hmm. I think we can control some of the technological and the innovation side, but we're probably asking the best part of 60 million people in this country to change how they've always heated their home, travelled to work, holidays and stuff they've done. I think the behaviour change is a massive aspect. I know we've got another question over here with the gentleman in the grey jacket.
Thank you. Tim Steen from Amber. Firstly, Chris, I'm not speaking to you because your team has been my team for 3 seasons in a row at Stamford Bridge, so I don't. Secondly, it's probably one for Chris, actually. Have you seen anything in the market where the data that we're undoubtedly collecting more and more of, we're able to push back to the consultancy teams that actually design the buildings to actually implement some kind of, you said it was going to be like this, the performance of the building is actually like this, what are you going to do about it, kind of thing? Because there's a huge gap in, I think, in post-construction performance measurement, and every other bit of the supply chain gets hammered for it. Ben in front of me is like, yeah, I get hammered for it on my, Yeah. But post-construction, there seems to be a huge gap of the kind of headline performance that you were sold in terms of the development, and then the actual measurement of the performance. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the standards that are going to be created will help shift that, because with those standards is going to come measurement that can be verified. And actually, at the moment, how do you verify an energy system with data that's pre-construction and pre anyone moving in? So it's really hard to do that. And we're in dispute, I suppose, and are being brought into a lot of projects where they're not working like they should, and trying to figure out what the problem is because of our experience in that side of things. And it would help massively if there was more of a defined approach to the responsibility of the designers and the installers.
It's coming though. It is.
Yeah.
So obviously building regs is you shall design it to this design, then you should build it to that. As it stands, it should be inspected as it's built. But there's nothing to check about how it's performing in use. But it's also very difficult to do so because there's so many moving pieces. There's how what's the actual weather on the day, what's the temperature inside, we'll see how's the occupational, what the occupants are actually doing there. But there's some projects, so Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero have got one on referred to the meters project. They've been doing this research project, looking at smart meters and how they can be used. We've just published a report ourselves looking at building performance evaluation techniques. Again, looking at these, because there are intelligent performance evaluation techniques that can actually monitor who's doing that, who's in the building, what's the energy being supplied, so therefore what's actually then leaking through the wall. And in fact, some of these are getting quite sophisticated. I think it's going to be a while before it's built into building regs because it's quite a fundamental cultural change. But we'll see its impact probably on, you mentioned it earlier, that sort of ambulance chaser type work. You know, there is going to be sufficient quality of performance evaluation that will start to ensure people are coming in to check the claims that are being made. And then we're all going to be on the hook. But I think it's probably the wrong way about it, but that will force that quality of build. And I think that's, to be honest, where the problem is. It's not necessarily in the design. It's actually how that design is translated to being built on site. Yeah.
Fundamentally, the commission doesn't do its job.
Yeah.
In a way, so you can't. You're starting from behind, and then everybody downstream gets hammered for the performance, whereas the designer just sits there and goes,
Absolutely, yeah. This is what we put out. Yeah.
Agreed. I think that I'm a big fan of separating these sort of systems from policy, because as I think we've seen, policy is up and down. You know, you can't necessarily rely on it in the current climate. So actually the idea of standards and approaches that people can test and measure will start to proliferate through the market from a commercial perspective, because you're going to get build-to-rent operators and build-to-rent investors that sit there and say, without the Future Home Standard, we're not going to accept this building. Without Planet Mark on X, Y, and Z, we're not going to accept this building. And they should be hard. You know, we've just gone through B Corp certification, and it was really hard. Our whole business is aligned to what their outputs are, and it was still really hard. Took about a year, you know, and it should be that hard. And I hope it does become that hard, because ultimately that's what's going to drive change.
Yeah, it's the high bar that we've got to look at. It's not the chase the lowest common denominator, isn't it? Okay. We probably have time for one more question from the floor. Who's burning to say it? Gentleman down the front here.
Hi, Richard from Greystar. This is more one for you, Richard, as well. You mentioned the biodiversity targets in January. I'm very keen to understand what maybe you think or the panel thinks are the most effective wins now. So Greystar does things with huge estates, which obviously has a huge amount of biodiversity on the estate. But then we have some very tight footprints that are just literally, say, 2 towers on a very small area. So what would be for Greystar or for any of our competitors out in the field, what should we be doing from a biodiversity standpoint that might elevate us in terms of the position of the carbon neutral piece?
Okay. Well, we'll give it a go, but certainly for the smaller sites, the good thing about the BNG metric, it does allow green roofs, and so that's probably where you can start to make an impact. The whole point, so the process is you should try to do it on site, or you can then buy units off site. But again, there's a distance factor there as well, so you're trying to get it as close to your site as possible. And then if you fail to be able to procure off-site units, then there is the statutory credits you can buy from government as well. But that's supposed to be the highest bar, is priced to be. So that's the sort of option of last resort. So clearly on the smallest of sites, you do what you can do and then look to trade externally with off-site units. The issue with off-site units, though, is that the market, well, it doesn't exist really at the moment, and it needs to be functioning quite quickly to make that happen. So what we're trying to do is actually just aid transparency. We're actually just launching now a map. We're trying to map any landlord who's got land to sell, or sorry, not landlord, any farmer or landowner or their agents who've got land to sell can actually plug that onto the map. And then that allows people to see what land is available locally to them, and it's just an introductory offering. We're doing this for free, and we're just trying to get the market moving to try to get that happening. So there's some elements. Obviously, you bring on the ecologists. So one of the key problems we've got is the quality of ecologists. To date, they've been essentially specialists at bat or newt, and now we've got to switch them because biodiversity net gain is actually just about the habitat. And then the logic there is that you get the habitat right, and then the flora, the fauna comes after that. So it's finding the right ecologists as well who can actually really understand what your biodiversity net gain can do and start to drive that.
Thank you.
And that's from January now, isn't it?
So it's from January, yeah.
Yeah, because it was going to be November.
Yeah,
right.
but we still don't have the guidance that was going to be published in November, end of November probably. So we're going to have 2 months to try to work out exactly what to do with Christmas in the middle.
So it comes back to the standards thing we've been talking about, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. I think we're kind of running out of time. So I think there's obviously a number of themes that have come up through this kind of conversation. I think it just goes to show the kind of scale of challenge we're talking about here in sustainability. And I think what it drives is that for decision making, everything needs to be looked at through a kind of sustainability, net zero kind of lens as we're going forward. And I think one of the things we have to make sure happens, and this is a personal bugbear of mine, is that net zero and sustainability is seen as something that's aspirational, that people want to do. At the minute, it seems to be framed as it's a burden, it's something that's coming down the line. We almost need to step back and look at this and think, well, why are we doing this? We're trying to build better environments for us all to live and work within. Yes, it's very technical in the delivery of it, but I think sometimes we get lost in the technical and economical kind of language around this, and really it's about building those better kind of environments and stop weather patterns that we're seeing. I'm not going to point out the window, but you know what's happening today, you know what happened last week. It was 26 degrees two weeks ago. Something's not quite right, so we need to look at this in the total round. But I'd just like to thank the panel for their time and their insights this afternoon. Thank you as the audience for getting involved and participating. I'm sure if you've got a burning question, the panel are going to be around afterwards for that. But if you could just join me in a time-honoured manner of thanking the panel with a short round of applause.